"Arthur, we're eliminating the position," Daniel Thorne said. His voice is sterile as the minimalist decor he'd installed in the director's office. "After 70 years, this museum is finally embracing the future. My name is Arthur Finch. For 54 of my 78 years, I have been the chief restorer at the Metropolitan Gallery of Art, a position held by my father before me and his father before him. We are the Finches of the art world, a quiet dynasty of restorers. Our legacy isn't in paintings we created, but in the masterpieces we have saved. Our greatest secret is the revelatory varnish, a formula passed down through a coded, leather-bound book. It's more than a protective coat. It's a diagnostic tool. It breathes with the canvas, subtly reacting to the pigments of different eras, allowing a trained hand to feel the history, the truth of a painting through touch and smell. To Daniel Thorne, our new MBA-wielding director obsessed with disruption and social media buzz, I was a relic, a bottleneck in his grand vision of a fast-paced, tech-driven museum experience. "I understand," I said, my voice betraying none of the cold dread coiling in my stomach. I looked past him, through the glass wall of his office, to the main restoration studio. There, on a climate-controlled easel, sat the museum's crown jewel, portrait of a young nobleman, attributed to Rembrandt. I was in the middle of its decadal treatment, a slow, methodical process my family had performed for over a century. Thorne followed my gaze, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't worry about the Rembrandt. We have a more efficient solution." He gestured to a woman standing silently in the corner, clutching a tablet like a shield. "This is Dr. Lena Petrova from Apex Restoration Dynamics. Her team will be completing the work. They use an AI-guided laser ablation technique. It's faster, cleaner, the future." I nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. The future often has little patience for the past. I walked out without another word. No pleading, no outrage. My assistant, Sarah, a gifted young conservator I'd been mentoring for 5 years, met me in the hallway, her face pale with shock. "Mr. Finch, they can't be serious. A laser on a 17th century canvas? It's butchery. It's disruption, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "And they're right about one thing. It will be fast." I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Keep your eyes open and document everything." Back in my studio, surrounded by the familiar scent of linseed oil and aged varnish, I began to pack. Family photos, my father's favorite brushes, the small worn leather book containing our family's coded formulas. As I packed, I thought of Thorne, of his arrogance. He had no idea what he was dealing with. He thought he was just firing an old man. What he didn't understand was that he was dismissing a century of accumulated, intimate knowledge about every single masterpiece in his museum. And what he couldn't possibly know was that for the past 6 months, the Rembrandt had been whispering a secret to me through the varnish, a subtle discord that I hadn't yet been able to name. I wasn't just restoring a painting. I was conducting an investigation, and Thorne had just tried to shut it down. I'd inherited the position from my father in 1975. He'd taught me everything, not just the chemical formulas, but the philosophy. "Art has a soul, Arthur," he'd say, his hands moving over a canvas with surgeon's grace. "Varnish is a skin. It protects, but it also remembers. You have to learn to listen to what it tells you." He was the one who last treated the Rembrandt, back in '74. I remember watching him, how he'd pause for long moments, his eyes closed, his fingertips barely grazing the surface. He'd seemed troubled by it then, but never said why. My wife, Clara, an art historian with a brilliant mind for provenance, had understood. She passed 10 years ago, but her voice was still a constant presence in my life. "They see a surface, Arthur," she'd tell me, looking at a painting I was working on. "You see a history. Never let them rush you." Daniel Thorne was embodiment of everything Clara had cautioned against. He'd arrived 6 months prior, a whirlwind of corporate jargon and aggressive modernization plans. He replaced classical music in the galleries with ambient electronic soundscapes, installed interactive touchscreens that blocked the view of actual paintings, and prioritized the museum's Instagram account over its scholarly journal. He saw art not as a cultural treasure to be preserved, but as content to be monetized. He'd call me a bottleneck in 3 different meetings. "Arthur, your methods are meticulous. I'll grant you that," he'd said condescendingly. "But we're on a 21st century timeline. We need to increase visitor turnover." I tried to explain that my slow method was a feature, not a bug, that the weeks spent observing a painting before even touching it were crucial, that the unique hand-mixed varnish wasn't just for show. It was a way of communing with the artist's original intent. He just smiled and patted my shoulder. "Charming, Arthur. Truly, but we have KPIs to meet." Now, sitting in my home study, the coded book open on my desk, I knew I couldn't let it stand. This wasn't about my job anymore. It was about the truth. I began methodically going through my personal logs, cross-referencing them with my father's notes. The book was our real legacy. Each entry was in a cipher of our own design, a mix of Latin, chemical shorthand, and family anecdotes. To an outsider, it would look like a madman's diary. To me, it was a roadmap. I found my father's final entry on the nobleman. It was short and cryptic. Nobilis, cutis mortua, sentio malum, tactus minimus. The nobleman, the skin is dead. I feel something wrong. Minimal contact. My blood ran cold. He had felt it too. The same deadness, the same discord that had been bothering me. He hadn't been able to prove it, so he did the next best thing. He applied the thinnest possible layer of varnish, documented his suspicion in code, and advised the successor me to be careful. Our slow method wasn't just preservation. It was a silent generational watch. 2 days after my dismissal, Sarah called, her voice a hushed whisper. "Mr. Finch, it's worse than we thought. They're not just using the laser. They're planning a massive press conference. A live-streamed AI restoration reveal. Thorne is billing it as a historic event." When I asked, my mind already racing. Next Thursday. That gave me a week. Thorne thought this was about him pushing me out. He was about to find out it was about my family pushing back. I didn't need to fight him. I just needed to let him walk into the trap he was setting for himself. My first call was to Dr. Alistair Finch, my nephew, a professor of material science at MIT. "Alistair," I said, "I need a favor. I'm going to send you a microscopic sample of a varnish. I need you to run a full gas chromatography mass spectrometry analysis. And I need it be discreet." He didn't ask why. "Of course, Uncle Arthur. Send it over." The next morning, I went to the museum. Not as an employee, but as a visitor. I bought a ticket and walked through the galleries, a stranger in my own home. I could see Thorne's changes everywhere. The garish lighting, the condescending wall texts. I made my way to the restoration wing, which was now sealed off with a large sign that read, "The future of art preservation in progress." Through a small window in the door, I could see them, Dr. Petrova and her team in white lab coats, swarming around the Rembrandt like ants. The air of quiet reverence was gone, replaced by the hum of machinery. Sarah met me in the cafeteria on her lunch break, slipping me a small, sealed evidence bag. "It's a flake that came off when they were moving the easel," she whispered. I told them I was cleaning it up. "Good work, Sarah," I said, pocketing the sample. "Now, I need you to do one more thing. A very important thing. I need you to get me the exact wavelength and power setting they're using for that laser." She paled. "Mr. Finch, that's highly proprietary." "I know, but Thorne is arrogant. He'll be bragging about his new toy. Find a way." I overnight the varnish sample to Alistair. For the next few days, I did nothing but wait and study my family's book. Thorne was making the media rounds, giving interviews to art blogs and tech magazines about his revolutionary approach. He mentioned my name once, calling me a titan of a bygone era who had graciously stepped aside for the next generation of innovation. The condescension was so thick I could have varnished a frame with it. On Tuesday, 2 days before the live stream, Sarah called again. "I got it," she said, sounding breathless. Petrova was showing off to some trustees. She left her tablet on a table for 5 minutes. The laser is a pulsed excimer laser, operating at 193 nanometers. She said it's precise enough to vaporize single microns of material, without any thermal damage to the underlying paint. Perfect, I said. Thank you, Sarah. You've done more for this museum than its director ever will. That evening, Alistair called back. Uncle Arthur, this is fascinating. The base components are exactly as you described in your notes. Baltic amber resin, oil of spike lavender. But there's something else. A trace element I've never seen in a 17th century varnish. Zinc. Specifically zinc oxide. I closed my eyes. There it was. The final piece. When was zinc oxide first used as a pigment? As zinc white? Not commercially viable until the 1830s. Absolutely impossible for it to be in a real Rembrandt. And if a 193 nanometer laser were to strike that specific zinc molecule, what would happen? There was a pause as Alistair did the math. Well, at a microscopic level, it would cause a distinct photodissociation. The zinc and oxygen atoms would break apart. It would vaporize with a slightly different spectral signature than the organic varnish around it. To the naked eye, it might just look like a tiny puff of smoke. But on a high-definition camera, with the right sensors, you'd see it clear as day. A tiny, anomalous flash. Why? Because Alistair, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Our friend Mr. Thorne has scheduled a live, high-definition execution of a masterpiece, and he sent out invitations to the entire world. Thursday morning, I sat in my armchair with a cup of tea and watched the live stream on my laptop. Thorne was in his element, a charismatic showman on a stage. The Rembrandt sat behind him, gleaming under the bright lights. For centuries, art restoration has been a slow, subjective process, shrouded in mystery. Thorne announced the cameras. Today, we replace guesswork with data. We replace sentimentality with science. Dr. Petrova stepped forward, explaining the precision of her AI, how it could differentiate between original paint and layers of dirt. The camera zoomed in tight on the canvas, showing a small, unclean patch. The robotic arm holding the laser hummed into position. The world held its breath. The green laser beam shot out, dancing across the surface. It was, I had to admit, an impressive sight. Millimeter by millimeter, it vaporized the grime and old varnish, revealing the vibrant color beneath. Thorne was narrating like a sports announcer. Look at that precision. The clarity. This is a masterpiece reborn. And then it happened. The laser moved to a spot on the nobleman's collar. For a fraction of a second, a minuscule, almost imperceptible puff of white vapor appeared, accompanied by a flash of light, so quick it was barely there. On the control monitor behind Petrova, a single red blinked on a spectral analysis graph, labeled with a simple, damning word, anomaly. Petrova's smile froze. Thorne hadn't seen it yet. He was still pontificating. But the online chat for the live stream exploded. Did you see that flash? What was that puff of smoke? Is that zinc oxide on the spectral analysis? Someone in the press pool must have seen it too. A journalist shouted, Mr. Thorne, your own data shows a zinc anomaly. Can you explain how a 19th century pigment is on a Rembrandt? Thorne's face went from triumph to confusion to sheer, unadulterated panic. He looked at Petrova, who was staring at her monitor, her face ashen. The camera, still zoomed in, was broadcasting their silent, horrified exchange to hundreds of thousands of viewers. The scandal was breaking, not in a newspaper column, but live, in real time, on a stage of Thorne's own making. The museum board called an emergency meeting the next day. I was invited. I walked into the boardroom, the same room where Thorne had dismissed me a week earlier, and took a seat at the polished mahogany table. Thorne was there, looking like a ghost. The board members looked at me with a mixture of shame and desperation. Arthur, the chairman began, we owe you a profound apology. It seems you were right. I said nothing. I simply opened my briefcase and took out the worn, leather-bound book. I opened it to the page my father had marked and slid it across the table. My slow method is a family tradition, I said, my voice filling the silent room, as is our record-keeping. That is my father's entry from his restoration in 1974. The chairman put on his glasses and read the coded entry aloud, my translation echoing in the quiet room. The skin is dead. I feel something wrong. Minimal contact. He knew. 50 years ago, my father suspected it was a forgery. My inefficient process was not just about preservation. It was about continuing a 50-year-long silent investigation. The color drained completely from Thorne's face. He had tried to erase history, only to find out that history had been watching him all along. Thorne was fired, of course, and faced a litany of lawsuits. Apex Restoration Dynamics went bankrupt within 6 months. The painting, now properly labeled a masterful 19th century forgery, became more famous for its story than art, a permanent monument to institutional hubris. The board offered me my old job back, with a raise and a new title, Director of Legacy and Conservation. I accepted on one condition, that they fund a fellowship program for young restorers to be trained in the traditional methods. Sarah became my first fellow, and eventually my successor. One afternoon, a year later, I was walking to the galleries when I saw a young couple standing in front of the forgery. They were reading the new plaque, which detailed the entire story, including the role my family's coded book and revelatory varnish played in uncovering the truth. Imagine that, the woman said to her partner. This whole time, the painting had a secret, and only one family was patient enough to listen. I smiled to myself. Claire would have liked that. My father, too. Revenge, I found, is a dish best served cold. But truth? Truth is a masterpiece that reveals itself, layer by layer, to those who are willing to wait.